Jamie Metzl is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and served on the National Security Council during the Clinton administration. He's also the author of Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. Jamie, always good to see you, my friend. You wrote on CNN.com, and I'll just quote quickly, the coronavirus alone didn't break our world. It just exposed a world that was already breaking. Explain what you mean by that.
So we live in a world where there are 3 billion people living in abject poverty, where we're experiencing terrible global warming and ecosystem destruction, where we have weapons of mass murder that are proliferating across the planet. It wasn't sustainable. And I think what this virus has done is just show us how unsustainable our world is. Here in the United States and around the world, we have these terrible disparities in people's access to basic healthcare, basic access to food, even in some parts of the world. And this virus is exploiting that. And if we don't want our civilizations to break, we're going to have to fix those problems.
Yeah, well put. I mean, you also write about the difference between how the world reacted post-World War I and post-World War II. I mean, there were very different reactions. How does that relate to what we're seeing geopolitically with this virus?
Well, this is a moment very much like 1918 at the end of the First World War. 5 empires had been destroyed and a new world was on the verge of being created. And both the progressives and the nationalists and fascists understood that there was a moment of incredible opportunity where new technologies provided new ways to reach and organize people. And the progressives, led by Woodrow Wilson, they dithered. The League of Nations failed, but the ultranationalists and the fascists, they marched, and they were so successful that they brought us the Second World War. And in 1941, in the early, darkest days of the Second World War, leaders like FDR and Churchill articulated the 4 freedoms, the Atlantic Charter, and it was really a North Star, a direction, a hopeful direction toward which we could travel. And when the war was won in 1945, they started building that world, and the forces of construction were more powerful than the forces of destruction, and that brought us 75 years of peace.
And the question is, which way do we go this time?
That's the game. That's what's happening now, and that's why everybody, if you're sitting home watching Netflix, this is not the moment for that. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment for our species. If we want to build a better world, now we have to be laying those foundations.
You know, with Trump's overt criticism, and this is just an example of the WHO, the World Health Organization, is that also part of the problem in terms of a lack of US global engagement on this pandemic? Of course, there's other areas too, trade and so on. The US has pulled out of any number of global organizations and deals. What's the harm in all of that on the world stage at this critical time?
So the U.S. was the lead builder of the whole post-war world, and American power, American values have been the most important foundation of the world in which we've lived for the last 75 years. And so with the United States stepping away from this role, stepping away from our own values, it's really dangerous. I mean, the peace and prosperity that we've experienced over these last 75 years, that's not some kind of state of nature. It's a constructed environment. And we see what happens when organizations fail. And certainly the World Health Organization didn't do as good of a job as it otherwise could have done. But we have to ask why. And the reason is that we, the countries of the world, the people of the world, we didn't build the World Health Organization that we need, that had its own global surveillance system, didn't rely on states, that had health inspectors that were like weapons inspectors that could fly anywhere in the world on a moment's notice and didn't have to wait 3 weeks for the Chinese authorities to grant them a visa. And if we want to live in that kind of safe world, we have to build it.
You touched on this a moment ago, and I wanted to come back to it because you also wrote in that article that regular people from across the globe must come together to lead ourselves out of the current darkness. I mean, how do they do that, regular people? I mean, a lot of regular people right now feel pretty powerless.
Yeah, in 1941, we had FDR, we had Winston Churchill, and if you wanted to have a better world, it was a pretty safe bet to say, well, I'm just going to follow them. We don't have those kinds of leaders now, at least not enough of them. And so what people around the world need to do is to recognize that if that's the world that we want to live in, then we have to build it. In the same editorial that you reference, I talk about this organization, this movement that thousands of people now in 90 countries of the world have come together to create, called OneShared.World. And what we are doing is creating a global social movement and political force representing the common democratic expressions of humans as a group. Because if you ask anybody in the world, do we need a system that protects us from deadly pathogens, from climate change, ecosystem destruction, weapons of mass destruction, everybody would say yes. Why don't we have it? And the reason is there's a mismatch between the global nature of those problems and the national way we've predominantly organized ourselves to address them. And that's what we're trying to fix.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is certain is there will be another pandemic at some point, and there are risks in not coming together because it does not respect borders. I've got to leave it there, Jamie. I wish we didn't. Jamie Metzl, thank you so much as always.
My pleasure, Michael.